We didn't find out about all this for months, remember?
No, it's worse than that. It's worse than that because these virologists that you're talking about include Fauci. And so it's not just virologists, it's the virologists who end up being in charge of the entire response. And so the question that emerges for me there is that if they were concerned about this being a lab leak, then why the strenuous attempt to deflect? Now, there's two possible reasons. One is that they didn't want to move forward with their presumption that it was a lab leak without a smoking pistol. And that's fair enough, because you might think, well, we're concerned and we're incurring, but we're not going to beat the drum about the lab leak till we're certain. And then there's whatever other reasons might be lurking in the background. And I suppose that's partly what we're trying to investigate. And so that would be the scandal that would emerge, perhaps, if it was a lab leak, and what that might do to Chinese-American relationships and what it says about virology research in general. And God only knows what other host of explanations. And so, but it's very striking to me. Yeah. So you've laid out a story that goes, well, first of all, there was a lab in Wuhan that was doing research that was strikingly similar on viruses that were strikingly similar to the virus that caused the pandemic. And that is the geographical locale of the origin of the pandemic. And then the virus itself has peculiarities that might indicate engineering. And so that's two pieces of evidence that are starting to converge pretty hard, and unlikely convergence. And then you have the virologists themselves, including those who are in charge of the response, or who will be eventually, also noting that this looks suspicious, to say the least. And then for some reason, and in a great scientific journal, or at least a once great scientific journal, downplaying their own fears. And so what's the motivation here? What's going on precisely?
Well, there was an exchange of emails among these scientists in which some of them said it's important that we don't damage international harmony. That was the phrase used by Francis Collins, the head of the NIH, in these emails. And another one says we mustn't damage the reputation of science, and of Chinese science in particular. Now, at the same time, another letter was. You mean
by pointing out that something unbelievably and god-awfully and unforgivably dangerous had actually happened? That was how we were going to damage the reputation, so to speak, by just admitting that something catastrophic had happened. And so it was reputation management.
Yes, but clearly, there is a risk that the world rushes off and comes to the conclusion it came out of a lab and this damages biotechnology, and it's not true. It might have come in a natural way, and then we've done unnecessary damage to science, which is a great pity. And I'm a big fan of biotechnology. I would think that was a problem. So that is one risk. But the other risk is that we are so worried about doing damage to the reputation of science that we overlook the possibility that this thing did start in the laboratory. Now, at the same time, also in February 2020, the closest collaborator of the Wuhan lab in the West, a man named Peter Daszak, who runs an organization called the EcoHealth Alliance, which had funneled millions of dollars from US taxpayers to this research in Wuhan over the years, he was preparing a letter for The Lancet, which he got 27 scientists to sign, saying it couldn't possibly have come from a lab, and we got to shut down that possibility. He didn't reveal his role in orchestrating that. He was just one of the signatures. He didn't note his conflict of interest in that letter, the fact that he was a very close collaborator and friend of the Wuhan lab. It took 18 months before The Lancet published a statement of conflict of interest under pressure on that. But more important than any of that, the one crucial thing that Peter Daszak didn't reveal, and that we didn't find out until September 2021, was that he had put in an application to the Pentagon, to the DARPA, the research arm of the Pentagon, in 2018, in collaboration with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, among others, to do experiments on SARS-like viruses that they found in bats. And those experiments were to include, if they found ones that weren't very similar to SARS-1, that were new, were to include putting a furin cleavage site into such a virus. Now, that is a major discovery. And as I say, we found that out from a leaked document. It's called the Project Defuse. It came to light in September 2021 because someone in DARPA, I think, leaked it to people who were investigating this. And Peter Daszak hadn't bothered to tell us that he was the lead investigator on exactly this proposal. Now, for me as a citizen of the planet Earth, that's pretty annoying. As a scientist and a writer about science, it's even more annoying because, we all want to know what happened here. I don't go into this wanting it to be a lab leak. I just want to know the truth. And it seems absolutely vital to get us as much information as we can. Now, some of that information is in China and they're not being very forthcoming, but information that is in America ought to be volunteered in this case. The other thing, the thing that the Chinese have failed to do is tell us what's in their database. They had a database with 22,000 entries in it at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was wildlife pathogens. It was bacteria and viruses that affected wildlife. About 15,000 of them related to bats, and most of those were viruses. So these were the viruses they'd been collecting from, mostly not from Wuhan, but from a long way away, from southern China and Laos and other neighboring countries. And they'd been collecting thousands of these viruses, and they'd been sequencing them, and they'd been characterizing them and describing them, and they had a database. And the purpose of this database, partly funded with US money, was to predict and prevent future pandemics.